Hello. Let's have a quick discussion about PowerPoints. Many people use them for presentations, and they can really be very useful in any presentation to add to what you are trying to say. But so many people get them wrong. So let's talk about how we can make your PowerPoint presentation add to your presentation rather than detract from it. Okay? So first, let's talk about the purpose for your PowerPoint presentation. Is your presentation going to stand alone? Is it going to have you standing in front of it, or is it not? If it's going to be a standalone at a kiosk or on a website, then some of the information in this presentation won't be necessary, although some will. But if you are going to be giving a presentation and this is a visual aid, then most of this information is important to you. You want your PowerPoint to accentuate your presentation, not detract from it. One of the things you have to think about in an instructional presentation as a standalone presentation is the number of words across the page. And we're not talking about just the title, we're talking about the language itself underneath the title. Now, with an instructional standalone presentation, longer phrases are acceptable. You know that people are going to spend more time sitting there looking at what you're presenting. But try to break up those phrases. Add in small photos or graphics or clips. Videos are helpful. But do something to break the monotony of just the page after page of information. Because quite frankly, that can get monotonous and that can also detract from your presentation. You don't want your audience getting too bored. Now, if you're creating a PowerPoint as a visual aid in addition to your presentation, you are the primary focus of the presentation. Your visual aid should not be the primary focus. It should be on you. So we limit our information on the slide. You have your title slide, which should never be more than 3 or 4 words. And then underneath that, in the informational section, we use what's called the 4x4 rule. You have 4 words across and 4 lines down. Now, of course, in the 4 words across, we're not including the small, tiny words, the 1, 2, and 3 letter words like if and a, that kind of thing. But you do try to limit the number of words. And of course, you still want to use media appropriately. You want to include graphics, you want to include clips, you want to include video if it's appropriate to your purpose, but try to limit your video. When you add video that's too long, then you can also lose your audience. Again, it changes the impetus of the presentation. Remember, in your presentation, the focus is on you, not on your PowerPoint. The next thing we need to talk about is color. For some reason, people love to use bright white. Don't. Bright white is useful, sure, but you have to remember most people are using this presentation as an accentuation for their own. And when you have bright white, think about those bright white textbooks. They can become difficult to read. And of course, there are people out there that have difficulty reading on bright white screens. So you'll even notice with Nooks, Kindles, all kinds of e-readers, they use e-paper or some other alternative color scheme so that you don't have to read on bright white. I know on mine, I actually switch it so I'm reading on a black page with tan-ish lettering. It makes it easier on the eyes. You need something that's easy on the eyes. And then don't use neon. Neon is so hard to read. You have to remember in a presentation, this thing is going to be huge behind you. And because it's huge behind you, that's a lot of color coming at a person. I mean, look at this yellow. Oh my goodness, you'd need sunglasses to see it. And then even this pink. Yes, it's a pretty color, but it's just too bright. You don't want anything that distracts from your own presentation. And if someone is sitting there complaining about their eyes, they're distracted from your presentation. Try not to use those colors. Another thing to think about with color is you really need to only use two, maybe three total colors throughout the entire presentation. You're going to have your fonts one color. Sometimes you might change a color to accentuate a word or a concept, but you don't want to use too many. You just want to use two or three colors, standardized throughout the entire presentation. Don't keep changing them on every other page unless, that's the purpose of your presentation. Another thing to think about, fonts. The font is so important in a presentation. Now, if you have an on-screen presentation and you don't have to worry about projecting it across the room, then you can use different size fonts. But if you have a presentation that you are giving and it's going to be standing behind you while you are presenting your information, you don't want your font so small that nobody can see it. But again, you don't want it so large that it's screaming at your audience. So you have to find a happy medium. If in some way you can practice with your font or with your presentation in advance, that would be fantastic. But again, font size. And if you look at this list of fonts here that I borrowed offline, you can find that there are some fonts that have different purpose. Some fonts are just unreadable. The Old English font is very difficult. Or if you look at that one that says unreadable, you don't want all caps. You don't want it to be unprofessional. You want it to give the impression that you are trying to portray. So be very careful of the font choices that you choose. Again, try never to go over 2 font choices. If you get over 2, then it gets to be too muddy, too clouded, too much for your audience to take in. Another thing to consider when you're talking about fonts are font colors. Now you want a nice contrasting color. Whatever your background is, your font should contrast with it. If it doesn't contrast, if it's hard to read, then your audience will lose interest in it. And only use different color fonts if you're trying to make a point, like if you're highlighting one particular word or something along those lines. You try not to use different colors just to be decorative. And you don't need different point colors, and you don't have to change color with every word or every letter. It's just to get your information across. Don't get too overboard with your colors. Just make sure that they contrast nicely. Next thing we're going to talk about, at least for this session, is going to be images. People love to add images to their PowerPoints, and I've even suggested adding images, clips, clip art, etc. But you have to use them wisely. If you add an image and you put text over the image, the text can get combined with the image itself. Look at the image here on your left. You can barely make out what it's saying. Now, what you do is you put a text underneath or around the image, that same image on the right, and you can easily read the text. Of course, my daughter might get upset that I used her picture, but it's very old. But here's the thing, if you use images, don't use too many on a page. Some people think it's great to blow up the image and make it the entire background. Oh no, unless that image is standalone with no other text on the page, don't do it, okay? Because remember, this presentation is being projected behind you. It's going to be large. You don't need it that big. You only need it big enough for your audience to see it. So it would depend, of course, on the size of your audience. In a classroom, you don't need it that big, promise. So take care of your images. Make them conspicuous, but don't make them overly so. Don't put like 5 on a page. Don't twist and turn them and put them all over the place. Only use images that you need to use, and 1 or 2 at most per page. That's really all you need. That's all we're going to have for this evening. Now, obviously, there's a lot more to creating an excellent PowerPoint, but hopefully this will get you started and your next presentation is just going to rock them. Good luck.